The future's already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. I find myself thinking about that old William Gibson quote. Some years old now, and it's quoted a lot periodically by futurists and brainy people who think about different tomorrows and systems change and creative consequences, possibilities. I used to think it was quite a cute line, but here I am on holiday in France, and it's come back to me quietly more realistic, because I'm surrounded by people doing things that I was promised we would do when I was at school. You'll have more leisure time. I'll be playing tennis all the time. That was more or less what they told us in the 80s. And sure enough, here in well, sort of bottom third of France, in the Prealps, place is full of people on bikes and in canoes and having a lovely time. And the sky's full of parasenders jumping off cliffs. It's turning into a bit of a theme for me here. It's Lake Annecy. We're down at the bottom in the Petit Lac in a campsite, staying in what we are calling a chaland. Chaland is a portmanteau of chalet and tent, chalent. An affordable way to just sit in nature for 2 weeks. There's this nature reserve right on the side of it, and you know, mountains. It's good for restoring the old S, as B.G. Woodhouse would put it. But this idea of the future, here I am walking on a carefully delineated boardwalk, oddly like being at home on Hengistbury Head. The nature here is not so radically different. The mountains are. And the place is full of people on e-bikes. The old railway line's been turned into a greenway that goes all the way down from Albertville, I don't know, 20 clicks that way, all the way up to Annecy itself. Dead straight, dead flat. We've used it a couple of times. And there's lots of old folk whizzing past us, looking very brown and fit, with a little bit of electric support, making it look easy. And it does all feel kind of future-y. And all the bird people constantly leaping from 1100 metres up off the, just along from the Col de Forclaz, and landing right in our campsite and over at Dussart. It's all beautiful. But of course I'm in a country that's just called a snap election thanks to the rise of the far right, happening in Germany, happening in other countries. The spectre of Farage rhymes with garage, you know, an old lockup full of crap. All these grifters who want to get the grubby, greasy little mitts on the controls of power for God knows what. Very unevolved bit of personal character, all in the light of our Lord Trump. You know, it's a chaotic time, isn't it? That seems to just be steadily getting worse, and don't we all want a bloody holiday from it? And then I come down to a campsite in France, a place that's called the general election, because of the threat of fascism. And people are sort of flying and cycling and eating a lot of bread and looking fit. Futures are just all around us in lots of different ways all at once, because they're all our lives, right? This is basic stuff, you know. But being here has made me think about just how different the experience of people stuck in this old idea of the machine is with those of us who are trying to dream big and look up mountains. People of Clacton being subjected to, you know, potential reform candidate. Some of them are loving him. Tells it like it is, all the usual things you hear about right-wing grifters. Speaking up for us, The issue we're all really trying to deal with here is change. The certainties of empire underneath our feet, as especially white Europeans, but all of us in the Europeanized world. Everything feels like it's changing, and we've not been equipped for that. I was reading a little article in Echo Journal, which I picked up in Amsterdam a couple of months ago. We went there by train as we've come down here by train, which feels very future-y to me. Just a couple of bags each time. And this article I read of her work, she's a writer, an artist based in Berlin, and she's talking about the idea of the fear of transformation, the fear of ecological collapse, and how on earth we're supposed to relate to everything changing, how infinitesimal you end up thinking about, how, you know, down to the molecules, you're not yourself. Where, as Nora Bateson puts it, where do I end and the rest of the world begin? My biome is porous, everything is porous. And Elke Wilk's work is looking at a lot of femininity and porosity, and the way we sort of genderized a lot of these ideas of what it means to be part or not part of the natural world. This is deep philosophical cosmic stuff that comes up when you think the world is ending, and when you look into the pit of nature and how it's suffering because of the way we've been living. It is manifest in the catastrophe of murder and destruction in Palestine, a place that's been run by dozens of empires over the last few thousand years. People never allowed to just exist. One group exceptionalized, who were vilified. It's just the workings of empire. Meanwhile, people are elsewhere trying to figure out how we escape these old paradigms, how we escape the old ecosystems of the stories we're brought up with that are lodged in our brains. And when I see that people are clacking, responding to news prompts, immediately framing it in a certain way, what do you think of this candidate who's promising this specific thing against this specific frame of the, oh well, I think we need some change. Yeah, I think we need people who know what they're doing. Yeah, you're right. But actually what we all need are the tools to try and figure out what transformation feels like to us. If I'm caught in change and it's just me, what does it mean to be part of this environment? Is it just a place where I go to escape the world, like Netflix, only a bit better because it's for my physical self? What happens when I eat some of the plant life and ingest it? The molecules break down and give me energy, but does the RNA and the DNA in the food stay in me and speak into what I am? I've eaten a lot of sweets and crisps and booze this holiday. What's that doing? What's that saying to me genetically? Can't be good. It's all imperfect, mate. But we are part of these systems as psychologically, as genetically, as habitually, right? So of course I'm going to say that it's artists who can teach us how to cope with the flux. I want people's nans in Essex to cope with the flux and say, it's all right, I've got perspective going back thousands of years. But I've also got the empowerment of being an artist or a creative thinker just a bit where I am now. The idea that we can redeem everything, actually, and not try and look for some idea of perfection, which is the lie of fascism itself. We're a long way from that. That's why the arts are defunded, all the rest of it, you know what I'm on about, comrade. The future is actually about us getting comfortable. A sort of shared future is us being comfortable with the ambiguity, comfortable with the change, comfortable with transition and flux, and from that confidence arisen by the embodiment of creative practice I will always bang on about. Maybe then we can build societies that can chill a bit and be comfortable with difference. Funnily enough, in sci-fi terms, I've been reading an old classic this holiday, Ringworld by Larry Niven. published the year I was born, 1970. I bought it years back as a sort of classic sci-fi read. It's not solar punk, but it's interesting. And this holiday, something made me say, take that off. Will it have anything to say that's relevant to me in the eco-disaster of today? It's not speaking about that stuff. It's set 1,000 years in the future when humans are already cohabitating known space with a few other life forms indigenous to other planets, alien friends and foes. And they find a big artifact a long way in space and they go and visit it, and everything seems bigger than even they thought the wondrous world that it was. It's a very, very future-y novel in the sense of all the everyday living that people take for granted, including its diversity and richness. And then along comes something that makes it seem suddenly small. There are things in there that bump and clunk because it was written in 1970 by a bloke. What a few moments when I go woof, but they don't get in the way actually. It's a rip-roar of a read with loads of cracking ideas in it. But it shows how things can become old artefacts. The most advanced technology, symbolising power, can end up falling to bits. Doesn't matter what it is. Become old walls in a nature reserve, and no longer a symbol of power at all. And what if you and I could be completely fine with that? We don't have to go into the same old dungeons, stand on the same old watchtowers. What if we could find our own stories in amongst this? I think that's what I'm leaving with. And the idea of looking up and imagining something a lot bigger than when you visited the future. Elke Wilk mentions a concept that an architect's firm put into Berlin. One of my favourite spots in Berlin is Tempelhof, the old airport. I'm fascinated about a hyper-modernist airport right in the heart of one of my favourite cities. And they closed it, I think, in the noughties. And a friend of our family said when we were there a few years ago, she went, yeah, it's a bit Nazi. I went, oh no, it's a marvellous temple to modernist architecture and confidence. She went, yeah, it's a bit Nazi. But what Elke Wilk says, setting a novel in the town she lives in Berlin, is that Tempelhof has been left as a park. I often joke that lovely First Lady of Momo, Caroline, should go and try and work for Berlin and work on the Tempelhof thing. Wouldn't that be nice? But they've left it, she says, undeveloped, undecided. This moment of transition, smack symbolically in the middle of Berlin. Built by, yes, the actual Nazis. The go-to reference for fascism themselves, the most organised and genuinely ideological fascists we've known in modern centuries, who were, from inception to killing themselves, took 15 years, including the biggest war on earth. That's how efficient and sustainable fascism is. But they left behind some of these bold artefacts from the middle of modernity, the middle of the 20th century. And what's actually happened at Tempelhof is it's just been left to be ambiguous. It's not even this, it's not even a sort of nature reserve in quite the same way. And architects there proposed the idea of helping people think of putting a mountain in Tempelhof. The impression I get from a distance is that they weren't serious about building a mountain, but were saying, in an act of speculative fiction, what if we put a mountain on Tempelhof? And we all looked up. I've been looking up and around at mountains this whole couple of weeks. I'm about to go back and face things a bit big for me, mountains to climb, but also have no certainty. The environment here feels very like home, but I have to keep looking up. And And maybe that's the thing, there's something about looking up, that we should all visit the futures we want to in our writing and making, but even in our travelling where we can. Go to places that remind you the psychodrama isn't everywhere, and your own four walls are not the whole universe, not by a very, very long way. You're infinitesimal, but that's okay. You don't have to get blown out to the cosmos by this as well and feel helpless. How can we feel more helpful, more full, more part of the environmental crisis? By feeling more possessed about our own right to tell a story through the middle of it, your own sense making of your life. No one else can do it for you, right? So practice that maybe. It's fascinating that in these days of crumbling empire, all around us, Europeans still wanting the promises of modernist certainties, and American is the same, the sort of angry, coked up son of empire, and then the injecting heroin in the eyeballs grandson of empire that is the current state of Israel. I chuckle at the image, but my God, the horror that empire really is. Are we trying to figure out how to deal with that flux? All those certainties were baked in from the beginning, were going to eat themselves. Empire was always going to be this consumerist act of total destruction, the myth of total control. It's complete infantile bullshit from the very beginning. Interesting then, the one thing that no politicians in my hometown during the general election are speaking about, nobody seems to be speaking about really here in all the European Parliament elections, and now the French snap election, I bet they won't talk about climate. Nature taking over the conversation. It's going to change our lives more fundamentally than anything if we can't work with nature and get to grips with what's going on. And make it part of our news story, make it part of our futures. And not just neatly boardwalked and managed, but actually trying to give some reparations to the damage we've done to ourselves and our inextricable part of the nature that made us. Yeah, climate crisis. How do we figure that? We're agents of transition, I guess is my point. And it's very interesting to me, that symbol of a mountain in one of my favourite cities, whilst being in my favourite part of the world outside my home in Bournemouth. There's an image in Larry Niven's Ringworld of a 1,000-mile volcano called the Fist of God. Very fascist sounding name, isn't it? And he's trying to figure out what it is all through the book. And I read the last few pages where he figures out what it is and climbs it. And while I was reading those pages, we had our first thunderstorm here clapping around the mountains as I turned the last page. And we discover what the Fist of God really is. And I won't tell you. But when things seem so big we can't move them, and we feel infinitesimally small, and when we feel like this thing inside us bottoming out, the total fear of everything changing, it'll happen when you're smashed by a sudden diagnosis or a death, or things you don't know will be right around the corner. Right? It's just part of the deal of being alive and being conscious. And when the nice boardwalk runs out and you get to the end of the safe bit of the nature reserve, you've got a sort of muddy track, or not even that, a field and trees to plunge into. What do? We have to draw on our confidence to have a go and learn by doing. All the characters in Ringworld do that through the whole book. Well, that's all you and I have got. Agents of transition. In your creative confidence, what can you do to help your nan cope with the transition? To help yourself? To articulate different futures, yes, but just cope with what it means to be in a state of flux, which we actually always are anyway by definition, mate. This is just showing it. What if we have seen glimpses of futures for yourself, for me, and many aspects shared for us, more of us? It's poking through the topsoil. What if the substrate underneath isn't artificial empire, but if you dig deeper, it's something else again that you're made of? All you need is the confidence to look up. I'm going to go home and try and look up. I'm going to try and look up.